Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we're going to talk about table rules, or more specifically, we're going to talk about my table rules. A lot of gamers are familiar with the term house rules, which concerns tweaks and modifications to a game's rules mechanics. Table rules aren't about the game itself. They're rules for the group, regardless of whatever system it is that that group happens to be playing. Setting obligations and expectations of what it is this game group is about. My primary group has been around a very long time. January of 1999, I hosted 7 players in my teeny one-room apartment for some AD&D. And while many players have certainly come and gone over those decades, I still play with 3 of those original players. Okay, so one of them left for 15 years and then rejoined us again in 2021, but he was at that original session, so I'm going to count him as one of my original players. Now, my 4th player, the new guy, has been with us since 2008, so when I talk about all the Game Master sins that I've committed over all the years, my players have had a front row seat to every single dumb and terrible Game Master mistake that I have ever made. Several of them many times. Now, clearly the reason that they keep coming back year after year is not because I'm some sort of flawless game master or anything. It's because every session I give them just enough antidote to hold the poison at bay until the following session. But one reason that they keep coming back year after year is because we have built and refined a table culture that works well for us, and our table rules help ensure that. And over the years, some of those rules have certainly changed, some new ones have been added, while some of those rules have fallen off. Over that time, all of us have personally changed, our lives have changed, and as a result, our table rules have evolved to reflect that. Now, just to be 100% clear here, I'm not saying that your table should use the same rules that mine does. What rules that my table goes by are what's best for my table. They might not work for you, and your table rules might be entirely different than ours. That is perfectly fine if that's the case. Make the rules that work best for you and your group. However, my table rules aren't up for debate with anyone who isn't at my table. Okay, so let's start off with the most controversial one. There is no drinking or drugs at our games. We play stone sober. This rule goes back to when we were all still in college and not everybody understood moderation yet, so games quickly started falling apart when somebody got drunk. Me, I'm spending an entire week, crafting a really cool dungeon for everybody to enjoy, and my grades are slipping as a result, only to have that spoiled because somebody couldn't hold their liquor or whatever, so I put this rule into place. Now, as we grew older with careers and families and not all living within 1 mile of each other anymore, we weren't able to maintain our regular Friday night game schedule that we'd always used, so we instead moved it to being 1 Saturday or 1 Sunday a month, whatever the schedule's best aligned that the most of us could make it. So instead of it being a simple little 4-hour session that was once a week, these became full-day marathons. So we start at 12 noon and then we go to about 10 to midnight-ish, usually more often closer to midnight-ish, but we're not going to be playing that entire time. So, the first hour or so, everybody's just, chatting and catching up before we start playing, and then at some point we're going to, pause the game and have a dinner. So those 10 to 12-hour sessions are more like 8 to 9 hours of, honest playing versus, playing that entire time. So while yes, we are a lot older now and we understand moderation much better than we did back in our, late teens and early 20s, with those 10 to 12-hour sessions, even if we're pacing ourselves to, just maybe 1 drink an hour, we would all be asleep or too tipsy to play long before the ending time came about, so we just simply kept the no drinking rule in place. This is the rule that I've gotten the most grief about by far. However, my experience has taught me that the people who are most upset about not being allowed to drink at our games are more interested in just hanging out with everybody than they're interested in just playing the game with us. I love my friends. Some of my closest friendships have been forged around the gaming table, so the social aspect of gaming is absolutely critical to our enjoyment. So yeah, while I do enjoy getting to hang out and chat with everybody as we're having a game session and enjoy each other's company, we are here to play. That is the objective of the day. If we decide that we just rather hang out and get buzzed and watch a bad movie or something, then that's what we'll schedule to do instead. But game days, we have an objective, and adding drugs or booze to that just doesn't help out with it. But as with many rules, there are exceptions. The sober policy is only for our primary game sessions. If we're doing a special event one-shot or the like, where there's only going to be, one session that we'll ever play these characters, then drinking is fine. However, I still abstain during those sessions. Game mastering, it uses a lot of my brain power, and I need to keep my wits as sharp as I can as I'm trying to, improv and react to whatever it is that the players are doing, usually some crazy weird plan or something like that. And I've learned that just a single cocktail, even if I don't feel buzzed by it, noticeably slows my brain down. So even on those special games where we are going to be drinking and it's allowed, I still abstain from drinking. Next, as I mentioned on our marathon game days, we do have a dinner. Now that dinner can be all sorts of things, just depending on whatever we're in the mood for. We might order pizzas or delivery from some local joint, or maybe everybody just brings some sandwich, pieces and we just kind of make sandwiches together. Or sometimes we'll just cook a really big meal, like having, fajitas or Cornish game hens and the like. Nobody goes hungry at our games. However, whatever it is that we decide to eat that day, it shouldn't take that much time to prep. So if we are cooking something elaborate, any prep needs to be done beforehand. Tossing something in the oven or making a few finishing touches, that's one thing, but stopping the game to begin cutting vegetables or making a lasagna from scratch, that is something entirely different. This rule came about several years back. We had a player who loved cooking and he loved watching cooking shows, so he'd always offer some sort of elaborate dish for everybody that he had just seen on the Food Network the week before. That sounded great. However, it started becoming, him tucking off into the kitchen for an hour or more as he started building some dish from scratch and insisting that, he keeps playing as we're now hollering to him across the house, asking him whatever it is that his character is going to do, and he keeps having to ask, what all it is that's going on. This was then followed by the presentation and everybody having to stop and eat and enjoy whatever this great meal it was that he had made. But the time that this took started becoming a real problem as it grew longer and longer and longer. And once I finally voiced that this was taking just a little bit too long for all these meals that he was making, it suddenly became all this drama about me evidently claiming I was opposed to the concept that we're supposed to eat during a game day. Which is, look at me. Do I look like somebody who's opposed to eating? The problem is that I and most of the other players, we were here to play a game, not cook and hang out all day. And if that player even wanted to schedule a day for everybody to hang out as he cooks us some amazing meal and just shows off all his culinary skills, I am absolutely there for it. He is a great cook, but game days are game days. So we instituted this rule that the meal prep should be as short as possible, and any prep that can be done beforehand needs to be done beforehand. Next, and possibly my second most controversial rule, we don't do character versus character. While player characters might not get along or be rivals or even outright hate each other, we don't let them come to actual lethal blows. I have a whole video concerning my opinion of CvC and PvP fighting. I am not a fan of it. Too frequently it leads to hurt feelings or the game just devolving into infighting. It is the oldest of my table rules, going back to when we were still playing in middle school and we were a bunch of little monsters. So there's no need to cover that entire 12-minute video here and all the nuance and details around it, so I suggest checking it out. I'll stick a link down at the bottom and at the end of the video if you'd like to see more on that. But one part that bears repeating is that there are exceptions to this. Certain games, especially one-shot adventures, we often relax this rule, especially if it's going to be something that we're playing like Alien or Paranoia, where character betrayal is just part of the game. Then yeah, absolutely, we're going to allow it in those games. Another exception is campaign finales, where at the very end of a lengthy, months or even years-long campaign, we might have some old grudges come out with sudden but inevitable betrayals. Or I might have some NPCs secretly tempting certain player characters with deals if the player character betrays and possibly kills the rest of the party. Then there's those nebulous, hard-to-define times when it's actually warranted because one of the player characters did something and they deserve to have some sort of payback for that. So those are all the exceptions, and my players know when those exceptions are. So think of it more as no CvC allowed except for when it is. Next, minimize distractions. The most notorious of player distractions is the cell phone. We've all seen, if not personally been, that person who believes they can keep an attentive ear while scrolling through their phone only to get sucked in and then having to ask somebody to repeat themselves or just what in the hell is going on. My ADHD ass is double specialized in this trick. Having that player who's toying on their phone or their Nintendo Switch or getting into heated Reddit debates on their second screen while they're playing, isn't just rude to the rest of the table who all came here to play the game, but very often having a distracted player ends up becoming a distraction to all the other players in the game. So even if you are able to pay attention while doing something else, minimizing your distractions also means minimizing your distracting behavior. I've seen several RPG YouTubers say how phones are completely forbidden at their table. Maybe like Sons of Anarchy, where they had to leave their phones outside their game room, but I don't require that my players turn off their phone or get mad at them if they're checking their texts or something like that in the middle of a game. First, all of us are adults. I'm going to treat them like they're adults. Second, some of my players use their phones to check the rulebook PDF or some game source like the Traveler Wiki, or maybe looking up something for game purposes. In our Cthulhu by Gaslight game, we regularly look up some neat factoid about 1890s London to incorporate it into whatever our game is. But third, my players have families and jobs, and they need to be reachable by their families and jobs. I've had a player, get a call in the middle of a game that they had a water pipe rupture back home, or their wife was stranded because her car had broken down, and even a call for a real life or death medical emergency, and they had to rush off and deal with all of those. And if any of my players had missed those calls because I had instituted some sort of, no cell phones allowed policy or something like that, and they had missed those calls, I would have felt horrible about that. So yeah, I'm going to allow my players to check their phones during the game. However, I also trust them that they're not going to be turning those phones into distractions. Now, thankfully, my group is very good at policing themselves with this, and I rarely have to say anything. If one player is spending more than a few seconds looking at their phone, maybe down under the table like we can't all clearly see what they're doing, another player will inevitably ask, "Hey Todd, is everything all right?" "Huh? Yeah, everything's fine. Why?" "Oh, good. It's just you seem real distracted right there, and I figured you might want to focus up." "Oh." In my experience, the polite concern of, "Hey man, is something wrong?" is far more effective at getting the player to put their phone away and pay attention than any amount of scolding them is going to possibly do. Next, missing a session is fine, just let me know if you can't make it. I'm always impressed that people can keep up with weekly game schedules, with jobs and families and 1,000 other obligations. Our schedules are in constant flux. That's why shortly after graduating college, our games went from being weekly to bi-weekly, and then eventually just these once-a-month giant marathon games. And, I try to set whatever the date that we're going to play as being the date that we can get the most people available to play. And then, of course, if something comes up last minute, that's perfectly fine. Life happens. Just let me know. If you watch my Secrets of the Ancients campaign diary, you can see how often we were down a player for some portion or another, and the only character who had a perfect attendance during that was Lily, and that's because, that's my wife's character, and if my wife has a scheduled conflict with the game, chances are pretty good I have the same conflict as well, and we don't play that day. Years back, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was watching some dungeon tubers saying how if anyone misses 2 sessions in a row that he kicks them out of the game, which, that seemed really excessive to me. I can only assume that they were running for more casual gamers. I often forget that my group is a very rare case of long-time players. It's been a long time since, I've had to endure playing with a flake who's just gonna, not show up to a game or always canceling last minute, and I really don't miss playing with flake players. So for us, whenever a player misses a session and we're scheduling the next session, and there isn't a date that works for everybody, where it's kind of working out that somebody is going to be missing the next game, whichever weekend it's going to be on, I try to give priority to the player that missed the previous session. That way they're not missing 2 games in a row. And finally, and this is the most recent addition to the list, only going back the last 5 years, is that anyone joining our table requires unanimous agreement. If you have an established group or they've got their good chemistry and how they work together, adding anyone to that is going to change the group's dynamic. It just does. And for years, I considered it to be my group. I'm the game master. We meet at my house, therefore it's my group, and I get to bring in anyone I want. Yeah, it sounds pretty logical. However, it's also not true, at least not anymore. It's our group. We're old friends, and game days are our times to relax and escape all the stresses of the outside world. And, since we do like to bring in some new blood to shake things up every now and then, I never want it to be a situation where I bring in somebody who damages the enjoyment of one of my close friends that I was already playing with. So while I'd unconsciously been doing this for a couple years, I finally made it official policy back in 2021. So since then, whenever I consider bringing somebody new into the table, I ask them as a group, "So guys, what do you think about bringing Jimmy in full time?" "I don't see why not. He's great." "I say yes."
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say no.
And if one of them says no, then that's the end of the discussion for me. Now, if the player wants to discuss it and give their reasoning behind their saying no, then that is great. They always do. But as far as I'm concerned, a single no, and I have my answer to the question. If you're in my group, I trust your judgment. I mean, my players have certainly earned that, and I should just respect it. But like with anything game related, there are going to be exceptions to that, because while this rule only applies to our main group, if I decide to run, a side game or do a special one-shot or something like that, I get to invite whoever it is I want, which, that works out because anyone that we're considering bringing into the main group, having those small games or little one-shots is the best way of seeing how compatible it is that everybody can play together, because, just because we might like them personally doesn't mean that we're going to have good table chemistry together. I've learned that one the hard way many times. So doing some short adventures or one-shots like that is a great way of testing everybody's compatibility together, sort of like a few casual dates before you make a long-term commitment to them. Anyway, those are our table rules. They are definitely not for everybody out there, and that is perfectly fine. These rules, which are clearly more guidelines than rules because they are all loaded with exceptions, they aren't just the product of years of playing together, but they're also what's allowed us to play together for as long as we have, because they aren't just about filtering out certain people and certain behavior out of the group, but it's also about keeping those players who are the best fit, keeping them happy and keeping them playing with us. Because once you find that player, let alone an entire group who work well together and can put up with everybody's individual quirks and dumbassery, you hold tight and you never let them go.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. And then make sure you hit that little bell notification thingy with it, because otherwise, YouTube doesn't tell you that the channel that you subscribe to has posted a new video, which, it's kind of weird that you have to go through that second step. Anyway, next time, amigos, y'all have a great day. Brother, I can't speak for all your viewers right now, but what the hell does that shirt say?
Oh, this? Yeah, my buddy Jesse made it for our 25th anniversary for our group. And the front of it reads, "My players have felled despots, conquered lands, explored space, thrown feasts, interrupted orgies, foiled the best laid plans of a dark god's cult, guest DJ'd a pirate radio station on a floating city," which that was a great story there, "raised a character by passing through the heat death of the universe, died dramatically, died hysterically, died pointlessly for 25 years. And then the back says, "And that asshole in the corner is still stacking dice during combat."
Damn, and now it's 27 years you guys have been playing, which means for over half the time the tabletop role-playing games have been a thing, your college group has still been playing together. Damn, brother, you guys are old.